Now, if you've got security dogs that are running amok, you look like a gangster. You got, at harvest time, you got out-of-state people coming to help you harvest and stuff. I know it takes a little bit of time to harvest, and usually when they do it, it's right at frost. I mean, so they got to cut, trim, and cure, dry, and everything within 2 or 3 weeks. But the whole issue is doing it within an agreed standard. City, county, I believe that they should kind of work correspondingly together because we are the same issues. The main thing is just as far as the smell, I don't think the smell's, that's always going to be a nuisance issue. As long as it's not offending the neighbors and stuff. Yes, you can't make all the neighbors happy. Other people, like this lady back here that has issues with respiratory issues. I have a hard time breathing. I mainly eat mine as a concentrate because I don't like smoking. I have a breathing issue enough. I was a smoker for 20 years too, and not anymore. But the whole thing is you got to have a little compassion on both sides, as far as the non-consumer and as far as the consumer. But as far as I hear constantly, it's about the dogs, the dogs, the dogs. The city should put something on the agenda to make a ban about vicious dogs. Animal control should enforce it. I know it's been a big issue with many cities. I moved from the Bay Area. I had barking dogs. I had vicious pit bulls running down the street, and it was hard to control. But like I said, that's just another issue.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Byrne.
Well, and back to you, Mr. Chairman. The question is it's a. Mr. Check is right that you've got about a page and a half dedicated to conditions of cultivation and everything else related to enforcement. That all of the provisions related to enforcement are there for a very specific reason, and that's to provide due process. Due process in the enforcement process. I don't see my wanting to change those provisions much. Not that it's my vote. If you wanted to, certainly we could discuss it.
I think the main thing.
The conditions of cultivation is where our discussion is.
Yes.
And
Right, because let's go back to the reason we're here. I mean,
yes.
I don't want anybody in Lake Forest in a residential area growing more than 6 months.
Okay.
Because it's not fair to the neighbor and the family and the kids and all that. I mean,
So I can't adopt or propose adopting or write an ordinance that deals specifically just with Lake Forest. I've got to have it on a countywide basis. So if you want to deal with...
But the issue that potentially, that it does exist in Lake Forest, potentially could exist throughout the county when
Yes.
you have concentration housings, whether it's Level
Yes.
Lake, whether it's Jamesville, whether it's in the outskirts of Susanville, Big Valley. I mean, that potential is there, and I think we have to have our regulations that would be uniform in effect in that.
and I don't have a problem with a person growing for other people that like this man lives
That's
in
the
the
law.
city. You know, he can. I mean, so but the more plants you have, the farther I want you from the neighbors. Right.
But I think we also have to keep in mind, and this is what the Lake Forest issue really highlights. And in that case, it was one person went in and bought up 6 or 7 properties and created a daisy chain of farming operation where he had 99 in each one of those and created a huge impact. Even when you scale it back to the manageable level we're talking about, I mean, it's not that it's, the odds are it's probably not going to happen, but the chance is if you had like on one block here, take a block just down the street here where I live, and if everybody on one side of the street all were medical marijuana patients and they all did, 20 plants or 12 plants or whatever you said is the limit per lot, and they were cumulatively all growing simultaneously, you could, in that setting, even create a critical mass that would equal to what's happening you know, in some of these 5 areas that we've had a problem. So we have to, you know, keep in mind that, you know, there can be a cumulative impact if you have more than one medical marijuana patient maybe living in a particular neighborhood or on a particular block.
Good point.
And the thing is that the direct result is exactly what Ms. Chandler is describing that she has there at the end of Valley View. And it's not because the law, you know, kind of concentrated, just by quirk of fate maybe you have. So you have that potential too. So it's not only what you're doing, but what you're doing in relationship to your surroundings. So how many do we allow in a given setting?
Well, you could control that by having indoor gardening.
Well, you probably could, but and some of them probably are, and we probably, I may be shocked to find out how many indoor gardens exist.
Well,
in my neighborhood.
you should know. You should know that the dramatic change that Tehama County took in the last 2 weeks is to eliminate all outdoor grows, period.
And
Yeah,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Chairman,
got a comment.
I was just going to point out it's now noon. We've got Mr.
Before I
Eller.
say, Mr.
Fishing
Chairman,
bait.
I know this.
If we plan on taking a break for lunch, I'd suggest that we take Mr. Eller's
I
time
was
first
thinking
and
you
come
could
back.
give them a chance to re-agenda items.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've gained a lot of new information today, and this has been one of the, I would say, more productive conversations that we've had on this issue. And rather than trying to give Bob immediate, you know, feedback, you know, I want to think about more what I've learned from everybody.
I think we need, we need to table this.
Come back next week.
Continue it next week.
We can continue it the next week.
And if I could ask, if the motion is to table it to next week, which I have no heartburn with whatsoever, that we do that with an eye toward developing a consensus next week, because the growing season is upon us.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I have one comment. That's where the direction of the board. And I guess my question is, when we're talking about a lot of these primary caregivers growing for multiple patients, which are creating, you know, what we call the commercial grows, or whatever you want to call them. And I think maybe we should spend a little time discussing the definition of a primary caregiver, and how many individuals can one person, you know, reasonably expect to care for as a primary caregiver, I think is kind of a fundamental question. And maybe that's the elephant in the room is are you acting, when you're growing these commercial type scale grows, are you acting as a primary caregiver, or are you simply growing marijuana for somebody? And I think that may be important.
Primary caregiver meaning you consistently provided for the healthy, safety or housing of that person. So, I mean, cultivating medicine for their person would be consistently assuming responsibility for the health of that patient.
There's some specific case law on what constitutes a primary caregiver. There was a challenge all along.
Well, probably they can figure that out.
You bet.
I don't mean to cut you off.
I'm going to take the hint this time.
Are you done with you, Burns?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. We're going to have another sir.
Let's, do we need a motion to continue this?
Yes, sir.
Do we, because of the expediency of time, we
Yes.
have a large problem.
Yes.
It's commercial
Well,
grows.
we have a problem. We don't have a Tehama or a Red Bluff or a Shasta or warm all year long problem.
Right, but we have a problem that we can
Yes.
deal with. But in order to get this done,
Yes.
do we need to hold a meeting, a workshop in between?
We already did that.
No, but I mean to move this along.
That'll be later.
So the way
No, what I'm talking about is to get the feedback, to get this ordinance moving.
that's your prerogative.
You mean
There's no
a special
legal.
meeting is what you're.
A special meeting, what's the timeline of us getting this done? I mean, if we hold off a week, it throws back a week. So if we have a special meeting, because this was a great
Okay, so-
discussion today.
If you have a draft ordinance here,
Right.
if you wanted to vote on this draft ordinance, we would schedule it for a regular meeting of the board. I've presented this as an urgency ordinance, which requires a 4/5 vote. which does not require 2 hearings of the Board of Supervisors, one being more than 5 days apart from the other. Learning a little bit from our first meeting. And it becomes effective. It becomes effective when the chairman signs it, if adopted by 4/5. It has to be published within 15 days in the newspaper of general circulation, the Lassen County Times, but it's essentially effective that day.
You can do it in 30 days.
You can do it next Tuesday if you want to.
So
But that's not the issue. The issue is the conditions of cultivation.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So what I'm proposing is that we have a special meeting to get this on the fast track, if you will,
Okay.
to discuss this.
Can you do us?
I don't think you can. It has to be a regular meeting.
It has to be a regular.
Yes, sir.
meeting. Even on the
The adoption of the
conditions.
ordinance, but the discussion can occur in special.
Yes.
We can have a discussion on this
At a
at
special
a
meeting.
special meeting.
Yes.
Well, Jeff, I think what we need to do is absorb what we've talked about today, and next Tuesday will be soon enough. I mean, if you had a special meeting, what are you gonna have? You got posted 72 hours, it'd be, what, Friday,
Right.
before you could have it, then you got the weekend, so you're
I'll be
saving one
gone.
day, Monday.
Okay. Just
Could you maybe put together, Bob, some of the ideas that Randy came up with, and maybe we can take a look at that aspect of it?
You mean propose a kind of step down or step up plant count for number of acres in the parcel?
Yeah.
Okay, you bet.
Yeah, if you get over, you're still getting into 30, 40, 50 plants. I want some distance.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's where the crux of the problem is.
That's
And you
what
can't,
it
and you
is.
can't have 3 20-acre parcels next to each other.
Sure.
Doing that, you're gonna have to, it's gotta be a dispersed thing.
You'll note from the ordinance that parcels in common ownership that are adjacent to each other are considered one premises for purposes of the ordinance, and only one grow or the uniform plant count applies to all.
That's what Henry County did.
Yes.
So-
Yes, sir.
I got one more thing, Bob, as you're going through and looking at this, as you get into some of the bigger parcels, sometimes there's a second home on that.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's gonna tie into a future potential problem, because you could have 2 different families living on the same parcel, which is going to add to your number of
They
plants.
rent somewhere else so they can grow.
Yeah. Which do you prosecute?
Well, I'm
Which
just saying, I
do you-
mean, that's something
The owner.
as a potential problem that might come up.
The parcel owner.
Which one's violating?
But
the
you're
ordinance?
still talking about a number of plants in close proximity, which is somehow, some way offending someone. And the question is, does it violate the ordinance?
It's not the density of the people you're concerned about, it's the density of the plants.
Correct.
And if you have pretty much every parcel in the state of California now, under state housing law, pretty much you have to accommodate what they call a mother-in-law cottage, where you have that second kind of residence.
That's the primary and the second.
Primary and the secondary. So we need to make sure that our rules apply to the parcel irrespective whether there's 1 or 2 dwellings on
Yeah,
it.
there's no differentiation in that.
Okay, but we need to maybe make sure there's a provision that specifically states that irrespective of the number of dwellings on a parcel that's legal under the law, that it only counts 1.
Okay, I think that has direction. Yeah. Okay? So we're gonna move
It was a
on.
productive meeting, though, and I appreciate the
Thank you,
interaction
Randy.
with the public comment. Thank you.
We have Forest Service.
Fishing game, fish and wildlife.
Fish and Wildlife, I'm sorry. Oh, you didn't
Thank
talk
you.
about that.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, ma'am.
You didn't talk about it, HR 7 or AR 7?
OR 7.
AR 7.
Also known as the road path. Karen
And
Kovacs, I'm with the California
I
Department
think
of
you're
Wildlife.
being patient.
I gotta tell you, that was a fascinating
It was.
discussion. And I'm a resident of Humboldt County for 30 some odd years. Never would have expected to follow that kind of discussion here in
Well, the
Lassen County.
expressions on your face from time to time was very enlightening.
It was fascinating. It was truly fascinating. So thank you for allowing Brian and myself to come and address the board before y'all break for lunch. Brian and I are going to tag team. The purpose of our presentation, just very brief, is I want to inform the board residents who took the time to come to the meeting today, some activities regarding the department. Chairman Pyle, you may recall, I've been before you at least a couple of times
Yes, you
before.
have. Yes, you have.
And part of that, again, is to try and be transparent with our activities specific to the wildlife program, which is the program that I supervise. I oversee the northern 9 counties, which includes Lassen and Humboldt County, interestingly enough. So what I wanted to do is to refresh the memory of the existing board who I've addressed previously, and then bring new board members up to speed very quickly. You may recall, with OR7 coming into California back in 2011, the department undertook a process to query our stakeholders in California, what do y'all want us to do? And overwhelmingly they said, you need to do a plan, Fish and Wildlife, you need to prepare a plan, what's going to be the management of this particular species if it comes into California and establishes. So what the department did is we did some outreach with some of our stakeholders and also educated ourselves, which was a very steep learning curve. This is a particular species in the lower 48 and elsewhere, which is incredibly polarizing. You say wolf and people get all goofy. And whether you're pro-wolf or anti-wolf, there's high interest in this species, which is surprising from a wildlife perspective, because we deal with all wildlife, some that are doing really well, some that are not doing very well, and yet you say wolf and the interest instantly is amplified for this species. Much to, at least my chagrin, of all the other well-deserving species that we have presently in California. That's beside the point, but again, trying to follow what's been the pattern of the public's perception with this species is the concern essentially breaks down into three groups. Those include those from our sportsmen and women, those who typically hunt ungulates. If I'm talking about California deer and elk, pronghorn. It includes our ag community, those who produce livestock, food and fiber, those kinds of topics, cattle, sheep. And it also includes a very strong environmental component here in California that I don't need to go into that with y'all. Y'all pretty well familiar with that. But what we did is when we started down this planning process is we selectively invited those organizations that had a large constituency in California. They included the California Cattlemen's Association, California Farm Bureau, Mule Deer Foundation, Sierra Club, et cetera, et cetera. What we also did is we did some outreach to the specific counties. We've got the farm advisor from Modoc County, the county ag commissioner from Siskiyou County, county ag commissioner from Shasta County and Tehama County. We had a representative, former supervisor, Jack Hansen, who was also very active. So we've really tried to include those folks who would be directly affected and those who have a high interest in the species. So where we are today is that we prepared a plan. The plan is in draft form. It's gone out for peer review. I'm in the process now of leading the effort to finalize the draft plan, and what we hope to do sometime late spring, early summer, is release the plan to the general public, seek input. We're going to have at least 2 public meetings, one that'll be in Reading, one south. We haven't made a final decision on where that's going to be. And so at that point, we want to hear from boards of supervisors, members of the public, the citizens who live in California, what they think what we've developed in this plan makes sense. What did we miss? Clearly, we are not going to make anybody happy. But with a species that, again, is so polarizing as gray wolf, you can't make everybody happy. So I just wanted to inform you that, stay tuned. We'll certainly make you aware of when we release that plan for you all to take a look at. So that was that on the wolf plan, and then I'd like to cover some other quick things, and Brian's going to come up and provide some more information. But I wanted to be able to answer any questions you might have on the wolf plan itself.
What's going to be the comment period time?
We're probably going to do a 30-day comment period. Yeah.
Good enough?
Is that enough time for us, Richard?
Depending on when we get notification, board schedules and that sort of thing.
What, if I may, is to suggest that your Farm Bureau representative, your cattleman representative, touch bases with the larger organization because they were an active participant in the process. Some of the concerns that I think that you may raise or others, we've addressed that in the plan. At least we hope we've addressed it in the plan. Those issues of depredation, those issues of compensation, those issues of harassment, just a whole host of things that I think we've covered all the bases. But If folks want to get some sense of early on what were those topics that caused some conflict or that were a significant issue, is to talk to those reps. But yeah, we're thinking 30 days. I mean, we've been doing this now for close to 2 years. We're ready to finalize it and move on if we can. To the best of our knowledge, we don't have any confirmed wolves in California today. Could it happen tomorrow? Sure. Could we have them in the state? Maybe. Again, we don't have any confirmation of that. As you're probably aware, if you are keeping up or you hear through the grapevine, Washington and Oregon this year, again, their numbers continue to increase. The number of breeding pairs in those states, the number of total wolves, I think the minimum population now in Oregon is 77. That's minimum, that's not maximum. Could there be more than that? Certainly. We believe that those wolves will likely be the source of those that when and if they come into California, they'll be from the populations of those in Oregon. Now, Oregon and Washington are moving forward based on their plan because those species are presently state listed in both Oregon and Washington. They're moving forward. They've reached these thresholds to delist that species in those states, keeping in mind that the federal government is, when they're going to act, who knows, but they took public input, had a series of meetings in the West, including Sacramento, about federally delisting gray wolves in the lower 48, with the exception of the Mexican wolf, which is in the Southwest. They've not made a decision yet. That's where we are as far as the listing goes. So I'm hopeful that will be ample time for the board and others to respond back to the department.
What, another question, what constitutes a confirmed sighting?
Well, we have received information about, well, I saw something cross the road. We've received photographs. I got to tell you, they're dogs and coyotes. We have received a couple that look very interesting. We have followed up to try and look for tracks, collect scat. The University of Idaho has a repository, if you will, of data of wolves that have come from Idaho, that have gone into Washington and gone into Oregon, so that if we do get a confirmation from scat, we'd be able to track the lineage of where that particular individual came from, to determine if it's completely unrelated, which might cause some speculation, because we're also very aware that the wolf-dog hybrid industry is much larger than we thought, and who knows what's running around out there. We do know that in rural counties, domestic dogs, they'll run. Mendocino County, interestingly enough, Wildlife Services, when I spoke with the staff from Wildlife Services who provided those services for that county, had indicated years ago that the guard dog du jour for pot gardens was a wolf hybrid mix. The good news was, from the standpoint of wildlife, is that they were easy to take, but they do possess a lot of those similar traits where they'll run for great distances, which is what wolves do. They can cover a lot of ground very quickly, but they would harass livestock, they would kill deer, but you've got that with domestic dogs as well. So that's our confirmation. We would want to follow up. We don't want to confirm that based on an image or based on the size of a track, which can also be confused with a really large dog, that's evidence of a wolf in California. But we're looking for any and all information that we can gather from the public. We're going to revise our website, which has been up and fully operational now for 3 years, to actually have a link where you can actually type in your information if you have a sighting.
You don't recommend keeping what you haven't tried out for.
Well, what I would tell you, you've got 2 attorneys here. One attorney.
He just looks like a lawyer.
Well, you may want to ask that question.
Boy, Bob, he cut you to the curb.
Even I can be insulted.
I stand corrected.
Hey, that's not what one of the
That's
other
your
people
good, that's your left hand, that's your right hand man.
Were there other questions? Anything else on wolf? Okay. So some other things I want to bring you up on in Northern California as part of the wolf planning effort as well as trying to be more responsive as to what's going on with ungulate populations in the northern counties. Y'all are clearly aware that, in the west, there's been a decline in mule and black-tailed deer populations. It's been ongoing probably for 30-some years. Elk, on the other hand, is we are starting to see elk reoccupy former range in California. We've got elk in the Warners. We've got Roosevelt elk actually moving south of Highway 36. We know elk are actually increasing. Concern has been raised, and rightly so, by our hunting constituency about if wolves establish in California, what will that do to our already declining annual populations? We are ramping up a study in Siskiyou County that's going to start next week to actually look at collaring females. We're going to look at when they drop does. We're going to look at health. We're going to look at predation. We're going to look at all those other limiting factors on deer in Siskiyou County. Also, what we're going to do is to try and overlay some data collection on elk so that you've got deer and elk that are being studied together in conjunction with predator habitat, those kinds of things. So we're looking forward to moving forward on that. I will also tell you that one of the things the department has been remiss in doing of many years is to query deer hunters in California. What do y'all like to see regarding deer hunting? Is it trophy hunting? Is it opportunity? Do you travel far? We surveyed 13,000 California deer hunters most recently. I don't know if y'all, it's interesting because there's a number of, I did the same thing to Siskiyou County, and there were at least 2 people, one supervisor who was actually part of that survey effort. But what it is to help the department and the commission to get a better sense of what do California deer hunters want. As you know, being elected officials, that certain groups tend to come to you more so than others. And our Fish and Game Commission is no different, but we have an obligation to hear what all our deer hunters are interested in. That's posted on our website, so if you or members of the public are interested in finding out what do deer hunters think, I would certainly recommend that you take a look at that link. One of the things that's most interesting, I thought, and it may be just common sense, but deer hunters, all they want to do, overall, overwhelmingly, is they want an opportunity to go out and recreate. They want to go out and recreate with their friends and family. That, above all, rather than bagging a buck, what was the biggest impetus for them buying a hunting license in a deer cave? So, I mean, it's no surprise. It's been a tradition. That's just something that you always do. But it was very enlightening. Here we are in 2015, and that still seems to ring true for California deer hunters. Let's see, I talked about elk, Siskiyou deer study, listing. I think that's covered everything. So if you have any questions on a general sense, I'll still be here. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to bring you up to speed on some local issues.
Hello, I'm Brian. I'm the local wildlife biologist for California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
What's your last name, Brian?
Ayla, sorry, excuse me. And Karen mentioned we're starting to ramp up some research projects in other parts of the region. Locally, we have 3 research projects, 2 focused on ungulates. We have a deer project that's now in its 3rd year studying the East Tehama deer herd, which summers in southwestern Lassen County. It's been quite interesting. We're primarily looking at linking up summer habitat with winter habitat, trying to figure out where these deer are going, mostly for land management decisions, trying to figure out how we would actually impact deer herds with what the Forest Service would be proposing for timber sales or grazing practices. It's been pretty interesting. The conventional wisdom with deer is that they require a lot of precipitation, snow, to make them drive them down to the winter range. But we're finding in these drought conditions that these deer are still migrating. It's probably the longest migration in California. These deer are going from Tehama County to Lassen County. It's I think further than any other deer herd that we have. The other ungulate project we have is a very large-scale pronghorn research project. We have approximately 6 pronghorn populations in northeastern California. They're the only ones that are hunted in California. And we really don't know a whole lot about pronghorn. It's never been a focus for the department. This is the first time we've ever done any real research on them. And we just don't even know where they summer, where they winter, because that's when we're able to count them, because they're in big groups. But we don't really know why our pronghorn are doing different things. We have pronghorn locally that are going gangbusters in Modoc and Lassen County, and we have herds in Siskiyou County that are just tanking, and we just don't have any idea why. So we started marking pronghorn in these zones last year. We started in Zone 3, which is Modoc County, and we came to Zone 4 this year. It's been quite surprising. We really didn't expect to have so much predation loss to mountain lions, but it's been quite interesting. If you look in the literature, they just don't seem to generally predate on pronghorn very much. But that's what we're finding as our primary loss is from mountain lions. What we're mostly interested in our pronghorn, though, is trying to figure out what habitats are important to them, because we really don't have any scientific data for what we're assigning as pronghorn habitats. So when the BLM or the Forest Service proposes a project to us, we have to go off our kind of our best guess of how it's going to impact pronghorn. So with this project, we're hoping we'll have a lot of these habitats delineated so that we have something to stand on when we comment on projects. And then the last local project is a sage-grouse project. As you all probably know, we had a huge fire in 2012, the Rush Fire, which eliminated quite a bit of sage-grouse habitat. So this local project is going to be one of the first ever to look at the effect of fire, a large-scale fire on a sage-grouse population. We started last summer. We marked 22 birds, and we're going to mark an additional 20 birds within the next 2 weeks, and we believe we'll have a pretty good idea of how the fire impacted sage-grouse locally after the 3 years of this project. It's interesting, they're still using the same habitats that were burned, so we're just curious as to how successful they are out there. If they really are able to still utilize this burned habitat, or if they're just slowly going away. We'll have a lot more answers for the next couple of years. And that's what we're doing locally.
Yeah, if you need to know something about pronghorn, you ought to come talk to me. I feed a tremendous number of them.
Are you in Zone 5? Are you in Big Valley? Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that.
I feed way too many.
It's interesting.
There's nothing I can do about it, except you guys don't even send me a thank you card.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm not going to shoot them to see if they're a OR7 or something, a wolf.
I know what a pronghorn looks like.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
That herd historically has not done very well, but we counted this year, and it was the highest it's been since the early 90s. So
Thanks, Aaron. They're still doing very
Good job, Aaron.
As far as the ungulate population goes, most of my chagrin, maybe out of sense of mountain lions down to Jeff can help him out.
Yeah.
But you're right. We're talking about, delisting. I mean, when are we going to get the mountain lion off the delisting in California?
Absolutely.
well,
Yes.
that
And
was.
you're talking about,
It's not listed in California.
well, I know.
I'm sure you know it's specially protected as a result of a proposition very similar to your
It was
marijuana
approved by
issue.
the vote of
Yes.
the people, and consequently can't be undone by the legislature either. May only be undone by vote of the people.
They attempted a vote a few years after it was approved, and it didn't even come close to being passed by the voters.
But that doesn't mean that they don't have discretion in issuing depredation permits.
Yes, that is the primary way that we are, I would guess, managing the mountain lion population is
And
through
how hard are
depredation.
those to get?
Yeah, if you have depredation, I will give you a permit. If I confirm that you have
What if they're
depredation.
depredating our deer herd?
Well, that's different. That's not depredation, that's predation. So it's two different pots there.
So I got a mountain lion that kills a deer 20 feet off my back porch.
There's generally nothing
True
we're going
story.
to do about that. If they're
There's the rub.
if
Good as your deer.
if the circumstances warrant us to think that that lion poses a threat to public safety, then we'll kill that mountain lion. But
Aaron will replace that deer with one of his farms.
But if it was my pet deer, I could kill it.
no, you're not allowed to technically have pet deer. That would be also illegal.
Actually, if it was your pet, we'd be citing you for feeding big game.
She's done for a moment. She's citing Garrett.
You know, the other thing you guys need to look at when you're looking at your ungulate population and the death toll, you not take into consideration, if you can, it might be too late, but, you know, with the lacking of, you can't use dogs to hunt bear anymore, so the bear population is just skyrocketing. Skyrocketing, and they're gonna pick up a lot of fawns, whether they're deer, whether they're elk, or antelope, or whatever, they're gonna be picking up a lot of them, and I don't know if you guys will be able to justify and show that, but that's coming into case, and the predators are just, they're taking over.
Yeah, it is interesting. We've had a fairly long-term study just finish up, not locally, where the number one predator was bears, and it was somewhat surprising. I think everyone kind of knows that they're a pretty good predator on fawns, but they were finding predation on adult deer from the bears. I think our official stance on the getting rid of the bear prohibition is that, you know, we really weren't controlling the bear population before we got rid of the dog hunting, because the permitting process, it was so low, and we had so many bears that, you know, it really wasn't impacting the population. It wasn't preventing it from expanding at all. So we didn't think that getting rid of dogs would affect it. Sure, and you'll notice that, you know, there was an immediate effect. I think this year we finally, I think we got 60% bear killed that we had before. You know, we only got 60% of what we were killing before we got rid of the dogs, and that was actually up from the year before.
I think it's a little more, Brian.
Is it more?
Yeah, it's surprisingly the number of bears that are taken without the use of hounds now is quite significant. If you think about as bear populations have expanded in California in the last 20 or so years, I mean, I've been in the department now for 33 years and have seen opportunistically deer hunters buying bear tags because they're more likely to see a bear, take a bear, than when I first started early on in my career. So surprisingly, there are still a significant number of bears that are taken. Is it equal and on a par with what was taken when we had the legal use of hounds in California? No. But Brian is correct. We've continued to see an expansion of bear numbers in California, and you all are probably aware that we increase that quota regularly to try and take advantage of that. But is it managing the bear population? It really isn't. But, you know, our bottom line is we have to deal with what the legislature and our Fish and Game Commission, the cards that they deal us, and it's frustrating for us as well. If we have more information relative to the rates of predation on declining ungulate populations, we as scientists want to be able to compare that information and do it in a very robust and scientific way, present that to the public. It's really the public's decision on what they want to do with wildlife, but we're confined within those, you know, the constraints of the laws that we have to deal with. I understand your frustration. I hear it in every county. We get it.
I just have one comment to offer, Brian, in terms of going back to the deer and the migration corridors and so forth. And, you know, you're observing some very unusual patterns. I've kind of also observed a very unusual pattern here in town in the sense that the deer, you know, we've got a fairly large colony of deer that have taken up residence, and I don't think they're necessarily being fed. They're just helping themselves and repeating the pronghorn. And my wife complains about her mooses no longer exist because of the deer. But what has been unusual is usually there's 2 or 3 of them here, and you can see them around town at different locations. But just the other day, I was coming back from a meeting uptown, and just down here on North Street, one block over, it's got a nice yellow racing stripe down the middle of it because they used some federal funds to pave it at one time. So it's kind of like the Indy 500 racetrack with the cars. But this one day I came walking back there, and it wasn't just a handful. I kind of gave up counting when I got into the low 20s. But it was a very large collection of deer, and they weren't like meandering into yards. They were racing down North Street. I mean, they came from up here, probably from Roop or wherever. And they, I mean, if it was a sobriety checkpoint, even the cops would have been impressed with how well they maintained the line. But they were going at a fairly good speed, and they were going downhill, and I watched them all the way down until they got down to about Weatherlow Street, and then they kind of hung right there by Monsignor and all, and hopefully dispersed into the park area. But they were in a pack mentality, and they were on a mission from God or something. But anyway, it's pretty startling to see.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's quite a few deer in town. They've expanded, quite a bit from
They're very comfortable.
the 80s and 90s. I mean, there's definitely more deer than there were 15, 20 years
There's
ago.
a good 30 or more in this particular pack, which is probably the largest grouping I've seen in town. I mean, you see them, but not that many of them.
And there's no doubt that people deliberately feed deer. We're exposed to it constantly. Whenever there's a nuisance issue with a deer, we respond. Whether they're stuck in a fence or they've got an impediment, they have to be tranquilized first. And when you go to these places, you can see where they've been feeding the deer. The better ones will clean it up at least before you get there. But it's pretty obvious that people are feeding deer where we have issues with safety and with nuisance complaints. I think you probably remember a year or two ago when I came to talk about urban deer. The challenge is, it's very difficult to manage deer in an urban setting. Traditionally you would manage a deer population with,
I think a lot of them are going in towners because they're escaping the mountain lion population around here. That's what drives them in here. And it has occasionally brought some of the mountain lions into the urban core, and we've had some issues there, which obviously you've issued some permits, I know of.
Yeah, in Susanville, not as big a problem. Definitely, the lion issue in Janesville is much more significant because then they start getting into livestock. There's a lot more livestock in the Janesville area, just in the residential hobby farm area. That's where I issue probably 90% of my mountain lion depredations is in Janesville. Certainly, there are lions in Susanville all the time. If you have hundreds of deer in Susanville, you're going to have mountain lions. They're hardly ever seen. I would say 90% of the sightings I get reported in Susanville are false. They're either dog tracks, it's a house cat, it could be a yellow lab. Very rarely do people actually see mountain lions in town, but they definitely are here. You can't avoid it with this many deer in town.
Good. Any more questions? Anything else? Or that concludes?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being patient and coming up. I
Thanks so much for giving us the time. Appreciate it.
Okay. CAO report, anything, Richard?
Just going to report that I'm hungry and on my way to lunch.
Any-